103,000. 30. Despite promoting non-violence, members of Ben Israelites movement have shown a willingness to engage in criminal activity. 31. BHI in Israel is generally peaceful, if somewhat controversial. The FBI has no information to indicate that Ben Israelites BHI community in Israel is planning any activity terrorist, criminal, or otherwise inspired by the coming millennium. Ben Israelites claims to legitimate Judaism have at times caused consternation to the Israeli government. BHI adherents in Israel have apparently espoused anti-Semitic remarks, labeling Israeli Jews as imposters. 32. Neither the Israeli government nor the Orthodox rabbinate recognize the legitimacy of BHI claims to Judaism. According to Jewish law, an individual can be recognized as Jewish if he/she was born to a Jewish mother or if the individual agrees to convert to Judaism. 33. At present, BHI in Israel have legal status as temporary residents, which gives them the right to work and live in Israel, but not to vote. They are not considered to be Israeli citizens. While BHI claims to Judaism are disregarded by Israeli officials and religious leaders, the BHI community is tolerated and appears to be peaceful. 34. While the BHI community in Israel is peaceful, BHI adherents in the United States became associated with violence thanks to the rise of the Noi, which reached the height of its popularity in the 1980s. The Noi was founded in 1979 and led by Yahweh Ben Yahweh. Ben Yahweh's followers viewed him as the Messiah and therefore demonstrated unrequited and unquestioned obedience. Members of the organization engaged in numerous acts of violence in the 1980s, including several homicides, following direct orders from Ben Yahweh. 17 Noi members were indicted by a federal grand jury in Miami in 1990-91 on charges of RICO 25 conspiracy, and various racketeering acts. Various members were convicted on RICO conspiracy charges and remain in prison. While the overwhelming majority of BHI followers are unlikely to engage in violence, there are elements of this movement with both the motivation and the capability to engage in millennial violence. Some radical BHI adherents are clearly motivated by the conviction that the approach of the year 2000 brings society ever closer to a violent confrontation between blacks and whites. While the rhetoric professed by various BHI groups is fiery and threatening, there are no indications of explicitly identified targets for violence, beyond a general condemnation and demonization of whites and imposter Jews. Militant BHI groups tend to distrust the United States government. However, there are no specific indications of imminent violence toward the government. Frederick C. Fish, ed. Merriam-Webster ed. Collegiate Dictionary 10th edition, Springfield, M.A., Merriam-Webster, Incorporated, 1997, p. 282. 36 Margaret Tyler Singer and Jan Jalalich, Cults in Our Myths, The Hidden Menace in Our Everyday Lives, San Francisco, C.A. Jossie Bates Publishers, 1995, p. 7. 37 Singer and Lalich, p. 7. 38 Singer and Lalich, pp.89. 26.7. Apocalyptic cults. For apocalyptic cults, especially biblically based ones, the millennium is viewed as the time that will signal a major transformation for the world. Many apocalyptic cults share the belief that the battle against Satan, as prophesied in the book of Revelation, will begin in the years surrounding the millennium and that the federal government is an arm of Satan. Therefore, the millennium will bring about a battle between cult members, religious martyrs, and the government. In the broadest meaning, cults are composed of individuals who demonstrate great devotion to a person, idea, object, or movement. 35. However, using the definition, many domestic terrorist groups could be characterized as cults, including Christian identity churches, Black Hebrew Israelites, and some militias.
Jews.
For law enforcement purposes, a narrower interpretation of groups that qualify as cults is needed. A more useful definition of cults incorporates the term cultic relationship to describe the interactions within a cult.
Torah.
36. Specifically, a cultic relationship refers to one in which a person intentionally induces others to become totally or nearly totally dependent on him or her for almost all major life decisions, and inculcates in these
Jewish banking cartel.
he has some special talent, gift, or knowledge. 37. This definition of
Jewish
cult provides
mysticism,
important
such as
distinctions
the
that
Talmud
allow for
and the
analyzing
Torah
cult's
again.
predilection towards violence. The origin of the cult, the role of its leader, and its uniqueness provide a framework for understanding what distinguishes cults from other domestic terrorist groups that otherwise share many similar characteristics. These distinctions are: 1. Cult leaders are self-appointed, persuasive persons who claim to have a special mission in life or have special knowledge. 2.
Bibi Netanyahu.
Dogma claim to be innovative and exclusive. And 3. Cult leaders focus their members' love, devotion and allegiance on themselves. 38. These characteristics culminate in a group structure that is frequently highly authoritarian in structure. Such a structure is a sharp contrast
Judaism.
to the emerging trend among domestic terrorist groups towards a legalist, non-authoritarian structure. While predicting violence is extremely difficult and imprecise, there are certain characteristics that make some cults more prone to violence. Law enforcement officials should be aware of the following factors. 39. Carl J. Jensen. 3. Rod Gregg and Adam Zubin. When a cult comes to town, accessed from law enforcement online. 27. Sequestered groups. Members of sequestered groups lose access to the outside world and information, preventing critical evaluation of the ideas being espoused by the leader. Leader-S history. The fantasies, dreams, plans, and ideas of the leader are most likely to become the beliefs of the followers because of the totalitarian and authoritarian nature of cults. Psychopaths. Control of a group by charismatic psychopaths or those with narcissistic character disorders.
Rabbis.
Changes in a leader's personality caused by traumatic events such as death of a spouse or sickness. Language of the ideology. Groups that are violent use language in their ideology that contains the seeds of violence. Implied directive for violence. Most frequently, a leader's speeches, rhetoric, and language does not explicitly
The Torah calls for the death of all non-Jews, the enslavement
the longer the leader's
of all no-Jews.
gone unchecked against outside authority, the less vulnerable the leader feels. Who is in the inner circles? Cults with violent tendencies often recruit people who are either familiar with weapons or who have military backgrounds to serve as enforcers. Apocalyptic cults see their mission in two general ways. They either want to accelerate the end of time or take action to ensure that they survive the millennium. For example, AUM Shinrikyo wanted to take action to hasten the end of the world, while compounds in general are built to survive the end time safely. An analysis of millennial cults by the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit describes how rhetoric changes depending on whether the leader's ideology envisions the group as playing an active role in the coming apocalypse or a passive survivalist role. A cult that predicts that God will punish or evil will be punished indicates a more passive and less threatening posture than the cult that predicts that God's chosen people will punish. As another example, the members of a passive group might predict that God or another being will one day liberate their souls from their bodies or come to carry them away. The followers of a more action-oriented group would, in contrast, predict that they themselves will one day shed their mortal bodies or transport themselves to another place. 3940 Kevin M. Gilmartin. The Lethal Triad, Understanding the Nature of Isolated Extremist Groups, accessed at www.leo.gov/TLIV 1996 Step 961 text. 41 Carl J. Jensen. 3 in Avonchier, Law Enforcement in the Millennialist Vision, a Behavioral Approach, accessed from Law Enforcement Online. 42 Ibis. 43 BA. Robinson in Factors Commonly Found in Doomsday Cults, www.religiousdolerance.org cultsite.htm, identifies traits that provide a framework for analyzing cults. They include the following: 1. The leader preaches end of the world Armageddon in 2000 or within a reasonable time frame before and after 2000. 2. The cult expects to play a major, elite role at the end time.
That's exactly what the Jews preach.
Explosives or weapons of mass destruction. 4. The cult has prepared defensive structures. 5. The cult speaks of
Israel.
action. 4. The cult is led by a single male charismatic leader. 5. The leader dominates the membership through physical, sexual and emotional control. 6. The cult
Israel.
is not an established denomination. 7. Cult members live together in a community isolated from society. 8. Extreme paranoia exists within the cult concerning
Israel and the Jews, extreme paranoia.
9. And outsiders are
Arbitrarily bombing just because they feel somebody wants to get them.
but whose ideology does not include the advocacy of force or violence. 28. A cult that displays these characteristics may then produce three social psychological components, referred to as the lethal triad, that predispose the cult towards violence aimed at its members and/or outsiders.
Yep, Israel bombs and bombs and bombs.
On the leader for all decision-making, almost always
In
physically
a cult
and
state.
psychologically isolate their members from outsiders, the first component of the triad. 41. The other two components interact in the following way. Isolation causes a reduction of critical thinking on the part of group members who become entrenched in the belief proposed by the group leadership. As a result, group members relinquish all responsibility for group decision-making to their leader and blame the cause of all group grievances on some outside entity or force, a process known as projection. Finally, isolation and projection combine to produce pathological anger, the final component of the triad. 42. Of the nearly 1,000 cults operating in the United States, very few present credible threats for millennial violence. Law enforcement officials should concentrate on those cults that advocate force or violence to achieve their goals concerning the end time, as well as those cults which possess a substantial number of the distinguishing traits listed above.
The cult known as the State of Israel.
Concern to law enforcement are those that 1. Believe they play a special, elite role in the end time, 2. Believe violent offensive action is needed to fulfill their end time prophecy, 3. Take steps to attain their belief. Those factors may culminate in plans to initiate conflict with outsiders or law enforcement. The violent tendencies of dangerous cults can be classified into two general categories: defensive violence and offensive violence. Defensive violence is utilized by cults to defend a 44. Jeffrey Kaplan, Radical Religion in America, p.57. 45. Ibid, p.165. 46. Lisa Bayer, Target, Jerusalem, Time Magazine, January 18, 1999. 29. Compound or enclave that was created specifically to eliminate most contact with the dominant culture. 44. The 1993 clash in Waco, Texas at the Branch Davidian complex is an illustration of such defensive violence. History has shown that groups that seek to withdraw from the dominant culture seldom act on their beliefs that the end time has come unless provoked. 45. Cults with an apocalyptic agenda, particularly those that appear ready to initiate rather than anticipate violent confrontations to bring about Armageddon or fulfill prophesy, present unique challenges
Israel.
to law enforcement officials. One example of this type of group is the Concerned Christians CC. Monty Kim Miller, the CC leader, claims to be one of the two witnesses or prophets described in the book of Revelation who will die on the streets of Jerusalem prior to the second coming of Christ. To attain that result, members of the CC traveled to Israel in 1998 in the belief that Miller will be killed in a violent confrontation in the streets of Jerusalem in December 1999. CC members believe that Miller's death will set off an apocalyptic end to the millennium, at which time all of Miller's followers will be
Yes, all the Jews waited by some rabbi's rotting corpse for 3 days waiting for him to be resurrected. That's crazy.
CC members suddenly vanished from the United States, an apparent response to one of Miller's prophesied that Denver would be destroyed on October 10, 1998. In January 1999, 14 members of the group who had moved to Jerusalem were deported by the Israeli government on the grounds that they were preparing
black.
for the fulfillment of Miller's prophecies by instigating violence. 46. Ascertaining the intentions of such cults is a daunting endeavor, particularly since the agenda or plan of the cult is often at the whim of its leader. Law enforcement personnel should become well acquainted
Like Netanyahu, the whim of the leader to bomb because he's extremely paranoid, so he just bombs away. Bombs, especially schools, hospitals, children.
Which is Hebrew for Temple Mount. American news organizations almost always refer to it as the Temple Mount. Therefore, for the sake of simplicity and continuity, the term Temple Mount will be used in this report when referring to this section of Jerusalem. 38. The significance of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem, cherished by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, faces many serious challenges as the year 2000 approaches. As already evidenced by the deportation of various members of the religious cult known as the Concerned Christians, zealotry from all three major monotheistic religions is particularly acute in Israel, where holy shrines, temples, churches, and mosques are located. While events surrounding the millennium in Jerusalem are much more problematic for the